Well, thanks for being here today, Dean. I'd love you to tell me, what do you describe a modern heritage house to be?
Look, I would say modern heritage is it's a culmination of again having this beautiful historic property, and then actually transforming that with again modern materials and a modern extension, so that you kind of have this beautiful best of both worlds approach. You kind of get to live in this old world, but also have this sort of new world. So yeah, it's kind of a bringing together of old and new, and celebrating the history with today's kind of modern architecture.
That's a great description. So what are the main hallmarks of heritage design, modern heritage design?
I mean, fundamentally, I think when you take something that's historically significant, I think it's really important that that actually is maintained. You know, it's not sort of not celebrated by having this overwhelming, addition to the back, but I think actually celebrating, the historical building is really nice. But also I think the key kind of component of it is just that junction of how you join old and new, so that you don't have this feeling of, just having something that is foreign and alien on the back, but there's this moment of transition between time, between history. I think that's kind of a really nice moment in the old and new, and I guess one of the real benefits of actually owning a heritage listed property and this kind of transition of modern heritage.
Yeah, and I think not many people can do that well. I know we've got a design company as well, and I personally really struggle with trying to celebrate that old and tie in the, what I love is like mid-century modern, and trying to tie it in is very hard. It's a lot easier said than done.
Oh, look, it is. I think the key, the key is, I personally think to it is just actually embracing the fact that you have something that is historically quite significant and is different, and just allowing the clients to feel that as well, so that when you move between the spaces, it's not, you don't sort of have this, this sort of moment where you pop into something new and it kind of feels a bit strange, but you have this moment where there might be a little garden break or something that really just allows you to stop and pause. So I call that like a little pause moment, between spaces, so that as you move through a house or a home, it's not really about having these little features, but it's about having moments where it might be just, we articulate it with the skylight. So again, it's just the use of light that comes in that really transitions, light and shadow between old and new. It might be framing a little portal. We did a project where we did a glass cube between the old and the new. So when you kind of came out of the old Victorian, you stepped into kind of what felt like you almost in an outside foyer, but it was all, all kind of glass top and bottom. So even when it's raining, just that moment of walking and feeling like, the rain's kind of cascading over the top, and then the door into the new was just this really intentional small portal. So you really get that sense of when the existing heritage finishes, and you can pause and then really move into something quite new and quite contemporary.
And I'd say that would be a great, almost a cost-effective approach, because I know from a building perspective, if you can just leave that heritage and not touch too much of it and add on to it and just do a nice little glass connection and then just do a new build, the new build square metre rate is at a much better rate than touching that old heritage stuff. Like, I know from a builder, we put a lot on heritage.
Oh.
There's a lot of money.
Well, there's a lot of unknowns. So the more you start revealing about something, as you would know, you start to just peel back layers and earth different issues. So I think when you get that moment that, like you said, you can just sort of really build something quite separate and actually have that junction, you can kind of build freely as well. And not disturb the historical components. I think another nice thing about it is a lot of extensions that are very typically just stuck onto the back of an existing property, they sort of miss an opportunity, I think, where you can actually engage with the rear of the property, which, normally when when there's no extension there, you would go out into the backyard and you can look back at the old property and you get little views of chimneys and little kind of vistas of the existing brickwork. As soon as you put something directly onto the back of that, you sort of lose all of that. So I think even those moments are really nice, where you frame windows that actually look back at the heritage. So you're sort of almost going back in time of if this was the back garden and we were in there, this is sort of what I would be seeing. So it's really nice as well to have those little nostalgic moments.
There's a massive push, as we know, for flexible living with, multi-generational. You've got your grandparents needing a place to stay at times. You've got kids growing up. And as you're designing houses, you're obviously thinking of the future, of what's coming for the family you're designing for, obviously. Can you give us a run through of things from a modern heritage perspective that you work with to kind of combat flexible living?
Yeah, look, I think whether it's modern heritage or any design, I think flexible living and even adaptability is really fundamental. I think, having been through what we went through and the changes that we've experienced with clients, we're always trying to understand the kind of life cycle of a building and a project. So when we meet clients, it's not just about getting their initial brief and their details of what they want then and there, but it's understanding how their family is going to evolve and change. Like you said, kids grow up, finish school, they move out, they have kids, then they come back, then you've got grandkids. So really like adaptability and flexibility. And I think modern heritage is perfect for it. Funnily enough, you sort of already have an existing house, and then you have this opportunity to be able to create different zones and different kind of worlds and functional spaces that, you can put the kids in one side, you can have the grandparents, separate, so you can create these little wings and these spaces that just allow the house to function quite differently. They can become studies, so you can sort of make a house feel really big, but also at the same time create these intimate spaces that, when the house sort of does evolve and kids move out or, things happen in families, if there's only two people living there, there's still this nice human scale to the project, and they can still experience both sides of this kind of historical modern heritage. But yeah, I certainly think, having these two zones already mapped out for you is it's a real bonus of the modern heritage sort of style. I envisage a lot with modern heritage, the attic space. Like for me, chippy apprentice, always up in old buildings and the ceiling, and the predominantly really steep pitch roofs with a massive wasted space up in the attic, and that comes to mind straight away. Just go, that's perfect for teenagers. Let's just prepare for a little room to go up there, a couple of dormer windows, still fits the modern and heritage aesthetic, but you can use that space above as well as extending out the back, like you said. It is. It's so true, I think, and that's again just going back to that adaptive reuse as well, of looking at these high spaces, these volumes that just aren't utilised, and just looking at clever ways of connecting, like you said, just kid spaces, little hangout nooks and nests. And I think one sort of nice thing that we like to do, especially bring in light in, is sort of think about first floors as having permeability. So we've done a couple of nets in projects where the kids can kind of hang out above spaces, and that kind of, again, it brings a playfulness and a bit of fun to those types of spaces. But yeah, I think even basements, even little wine cellars, we've done quite a few really cool little quirky wine cellars, in the historical, like the Victorians, because they've just got really great conditions, and you don't have to necessarily excavate. You can just do it between the footings. So you just have these little lift up panels, these cool little wine cellars that they can step down into, and little seating around. So there's some really clever little things that you can do with those spaces. But that's just all, like you said, just it's about adaptive reuse, transformation, and really allowing buildings to evolve with the people that live in them, and not just be very static, and going, this is a bedroom only and that's all it's ever going to be. Yeah, and I'd say the demographic that normally lives in these heritage properties is predominantly inner city corporate people with kids, sometimes having to work from home, having a home office, having a shut off room for the kids if they're home, having that option to work from home, still have a place for your kids to be while you're working from home. We've seen that's very common now. So having that professional space is important. Yeah, again, it's all about that transformative use. I think, when you've got an old historical building and a property that already exists, you can quite easily compartmentalise spaces, and again, just use the kind of thickness of the natural walls as well to create really cool soundproof rooms. So, if the extension is where the entertaining is and the kind of social activity of a house is, you can have someone working from home quite easily in the front portion of the existing house, because it's far removed, it's quiet. And I think also that touches on this idea of wellness and mindfulness that we sort of bring into a lot of projects now, which is really, especially with social media and just connectivity, it's so hard to actually get offline and just switch off. So we've done a lot of projects now where we actively look at positioning workspaces quite separate and independent, that you're not necessarily walking past all the time. Because I think, even from my own experience, if you walk past a workspace, it's sort of like, oh, maybe I'll check that email, just go in and check if that's come through. Whereas if it's in a remote section, and this is kind of the beauty about modern heritage, is you can put that room in a very remote space of the house that you're not walking past. So it's kind of this mindfulness of, okay, I'm leaving.
Yeah, that's
leaving
a great point. Because I know for me, I worked from home for a long time, and it just put this feeling of like, I just never felt like I was at home. I didn't feel like I ever went home. I was always just at work because I was, in the house working. But having that separation, I feel like you close the door and go, now I go home to my family, even though it's down the hallway or whatever it is. That's a good point.
And I think even like if you think of houses like little pavilions, where you've got little sections of the home that just allow you to disconnect from certain things. We've done kind of quite kooky things that I'm not sure clients probably fully love this when they move in, but the idea is awesome. It's just actually disconnecting Wi-Fi from bedrooms. Again, it's something to, that you've got to really consider and talk through, but it's just that idea of wellness and just allowing your brain to just switch off. Because I think when you've just got the access to something constantly, it's hard to just leave it. Whereas if you go into a room and you know that there's no Wi-Fi, it sort of encourages you to leave your phone elsewhere. So I think, there's moments of that I think having just this compartmentalization in homes and that adaptability.
Well, even for kids, I know you've got a 9-year-old boy as well, and the games and everything online, if you can just shut that room off so they can't go gaming all night, that's helpful.
Oh, it is massive.
So you touched on some really good points from a design perspective. Is there any other points that you do in your design practice?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of things that you really want to bring into projects, or personally I think are fundamental to really good design projects. One of them is landscape. I think, really connecting any house just with the entirety of the block, whether it's a side garden, pocket gardens, little courtyards. And I think just giving the clients that sense of secluded space, particularly in inner city suburban properties. That's sort of my main thing is when you first go and visit the site, is you look around the site and you look for things like, are they overlooked? What are the aspects? Where do I want to face? Windows, what do I want to open them up to? So that when they're moving in and around their house, they're looking out at things that are actually quite nice and engaging, rather than just sort of placing windows that face fences and things like that. We kind of actively try and avoid that and really create just these little moments, these pockets of landscape that, also bringing that outside to inside. I think when that happens, you get these really beautiful sort of transition between this outside, inside approach that people often talk about. I think that's done in materials, textures, tones, surfaces that transition inside to out, but certainly just gardens and greenery. It's such a fundamental thing at the kind of core of what we do as a practice. Some of the other things is light. The biggest question that we get asked by clients when they purchase a heritage property is, how do I make more light? How do I get it, not to be as dark? I think part of it is embracing that it does have that sort of moodier, darker kind of aesthetic, and looking at opportunities of which side of the house is the darker side of the house. So it's really about understanding our clients' individual needs and then looking at the actual building. Where does the sun move? And how can we respond directly to those points? Skylights and just opening up, ceilings and things. That's probably one of my other favourite things to do is, when you sort of first go into a house and it's quite dingy, just opening up walls often does that, making spaces a little bit bigger. So taking that kind of rabbit warren nature out of projects. As soon as you sort of open up walls and just kind of strategically allow light to transition through spaces. So you might not necessarily have a north-facing window on one side of the building, but it doesn't mean that you can't open and borrow light through rooms. You know, that transition of light I think is really nice as well. So they're fundamentals that I think really add to a great house where you again, you just feel connected with the outside.
And I'd say seeing all this restoration and repairs and everything that you do in your practice, durability would be a massive one for the new buildings that you're creating, like the extension, like durability and types of materials and claddings and things that you would select would be at the forefront, because you've just had so much drama trying to restore some crappy old construction that people used to say the good old days, but I know as a builder it was the bad old days. The stuff they used to do, just sticking, you know, timber straight into dirt and trying to hold a house up with it.
Yeah.
But like durability, like what do you sort of use for, you know, your products to make sure that the modern connections and things are going to last?
Yeah, I think durability is important. As you say, when you start peeling some of these buildings back, they've stood there for hundreds of years, so they have this kind of inherent durability naturally. But as you say, the kind of building techniques and practices, they weren't as advanced and as kind of, I guess, from a longevity perspective. They sort of built things that over time, when you're not maintaining something, you know, it can be built really well, but if it's not maintained, and I think maintenance, as you said, and durability is something that then transitions into the extension where you think, okay, how do we then build something that, you know, we're going to restore this property. How do we build something that's also then going to match its longevity and durability? And as you say, I mean, I like to use more masonry type materials, cladding products that I know are going to last, that, you know, clients, they're not going to have to constantly keep restaining, you know, where it looks good for the first year, but then you come back to shoot it in a year and a half and, you know, the timber's faded or, you know, the sun's kind of damaged things. I think that's a big thing, particularly in Australia, is, you know, the climate here is so harsh, and I think the selection of materials for clients is really important, because, you know, they're sort of relying on us to pick products that, again, are easy to work with, easy to live with, and they don't necessarily fully understand sometimes that, you know, yes, it's a natural product, but unless it's treated properly, and it's going to take maintenance, care, and if we've got clients that love doing that, it's awesome. But a lot of our clients, you know, they don't want to be maintaining their house. They want to live in them and enjoy them. And so, yeah, we look for masonry products that have texture, have shape, have form, but also, you know, give us that durability.
So you've spoke a lot about durability. What sort of products do you specify for resilience and durability of a modern heritage?
Yeah, again, just touching on the masonry, and just products that are really low maintenance, and have really high resilience. So I think, you know, we've got a lot of projects that are weatherboard. A lot of clients want to replace the weatherboards because there's an opportunity to strip it back, re-insulate the house that has no insulation in it. So again, we're starting to, you know, talk about thermal properties. Then there's the opportunity to bring in, you know, like a Hardie product, like the linear, like the weatherboards, which are perfect for this. They have the exact same weatherboard aesthetic, but are just going to last a hell of a lot longer. So as far as products go, they're just really, really great to get that same aesthetic, create that same traditional feeling, but the clients then have the confidence that, okay, I don't need to keep sanding this back, keep repainting. They're just, the resilience of them is much higher. There's also products then that we can go to for cladding, because I think lightweight construction is, again, if we can go lightweight, it makes the projects far more cost effective. It gives us different options with foundations, you know, can bring it off the ground, but also you don't just want to keep, you know, do a little mock weatherboard on the back. So then you sort of look at, you know, fine texture products, things that actually have, you know, ability to be adapted and changed. And I think as architects, you know, the last thing you want to do is just put a standard board on a facade, but you want to be able to play with that and again bring in shape, texture, but also know that it's got that resilience that you need.
So when you're adding these connections, obviously budget is a massive constraint for any client, and time and efficiency building them. You mentioned, you've got products like Oblique, Linear, Hardie Fine Texture. These are all pre-primed, ready to paint products that are super easy from a builder to install. What sort of products have you been sort of specifying, and how are you using these, and where do you save cost, where do you spend cost when you're doing these sort of things?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think with what I love about cladding is, given its lightweight nature, it just means that we've got so much more flexibility in how we actually construct and detail the building from the ground up from a foundations perspective. Slabs, concrete slabs, they're not cheap to pour, they're not cheap to do, and the minute you can get a house off the ground and you can put it on stumps, lightweight, what these claddings do, they offer us the ability to create this sort of appearance of a heavyweight construction, of something that looks, quite robust, without necessarily having to have a concrete slab that it sits on. So again, that alone just saves clients so much money, where otherwise, if they're just bound to, you have to put it on a slab, the minute you switch to masonry, you need a concrete footing, you need a slab, you're instantly going down that path. So I think
you need a pump, you need trucks, you need a road closure. All of your work would be in tight little streets, and the neighbours would be real close, no room for scaffold and all the rest of it. I could just imagine the headache involved in masonry construction versus lightweight, quick, easy construction where you're in and out without any need for concrete pumps and cranes and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, as you say, traffic management, and I think this is the thing that a lot of people it gets missed a lot. They look at products and just the actual cost of the product. But I think what's more important than just the cost of the product is just time. I think it's so overlooked. The labour intensity behind things is so overlooked, particularly the installation method of claddings of products. Again, foam and render is two different trades, that you've got to get in, plus you've got to paint it. That's three trades. That's three of the amount of time.
You've got a factory-made product versus someone making on site. You never know who you're going to get. Or the apprentice might have had a bad weekend and done a pretty bad job of the render, and then you're ripping it down, redoing it. The rain affects it. You've got rain delays, but products that are made in a factory, you just screw on, they're pre-primed, ready to paint. That speeds up construction massively. Yeah,
it really does. And I think even just the way it's applied as well is super important for builders and people just to understand, like, for example, with the cladding, just putting it on a thicker batten just means that you can then space the battens at the exact points that the fixing actually happens, which means there's far less noggining out. The trades don't have to go back in and literally noggin out between every single stud to fix this, because it's got enough, meat in the actual timber to screw to. Just little things like that go a long way. Otherwise, that's the difference between 2 days of a carpenter nogging out every single wall that the cladding's going on versus them just putting a rail batten and fixing it straight to the wall. That's 2 days. That's a lot of money. So just all those little things, like you say, it's time. People often just think about the product
and doing that. Cost. Doing that is a great tip, because now we're working with 7-star rated houses. Creating that cavity does wonders for preventing thermal mass getting through that building. So, and it's also a massive prevention from a water ingress perspective. For me as a builder, I push every client to allow us that little bit of extra, it's 30 millimeters, that little bit of extra space to have that air gap, the cavity, because no water ever gets in. If you've got that sort of safety net, any water passes down the wall wrap and out the bottom vent strip. So,
well, yeah, as we were talking about earlier, I think buildings, they need to breathe, and I think one of the biggest mistakes is direct fixing cladding straight to a frame. You get sort of, over time, you're going to get wet rot, there's going to be condensation, and you've just got all these thermal layers that just, it's all thermal bridged, like the whole facade is thermally bridged, which means all the heat from the outside transfers straight to the inside. So again, with these products, being able to just put, lightweight battens, 30mm cavity, just gives you that air pocket, your breathable membrane, and then just your insulation cavities, I think is really, really important. And as you say, it's not costing you anymore, but your building's performing at a far, far higher performance level from a thermal perspective.
I think people are going to have to lean on this advice now, because we have to. a year back, we didn't really have to work too hard to get to 6 stars, but now we have to get to 7. That little bit of extra thought out detailing will get you there. So having this advice is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think using the materials as well to their advantage is really important. Like actually understanding the property and the value of materials and what they can and can't do is, as you say, it's all integral to really good design. And I mean, look, 7-star is just, for me, the kind of idea of 7-star is just, it's a notion of, again, thermal performance. But I think, if you design your buildings really well with cross ventilation, good natural daylight, your clients aren't switching on and off lights constantly throughout the day, but they can literally inhabit the house, really, really wonderfully with natural light and without actually artificial. You're saving energy, you're saving power, and all of that adds to, it's not just about the build cost, but it's just the lifestyle cost of the house. How the bigger the house, the more it is to run, and I think getting the thermal properties right of a new extension just saves you money well after the build.
So you've given us some really quality information there on what I believe is the hardest of all the 8 modern forecast designs for James Hardie. There's so much technical things in there. You've created a handbook. Can you give us a bit of a rundown of what we'll find in that handbook?
Oh yeah, look, it's, as you said, it's just full of all our tips, all our hints of really how to transform a property and make it into this idea of a modern heritage. It includes just real budget ideas, things that we think are really important when doing this, transitional things, moments, colours, textures, and really just the Hardie products that we think are really, really great and go well with creating a modern heritage home.
Thanks, Epstein. That was so great to chat. I learned a lot. Thanks for coming in.
No worries.